Hi, my name is Leanne Meier, and this is Once a Nurse, Always a Nurse. The past 3 years have been a time of growing and learning, and a bit of frustration and a whole lot of abject terror thrown in for good measure for nurses. I have been a nurse for 50 years, and I've been doing this podcast now since 2017. So I thought I had a pretty good handle on nursing and on healthcare, the healthcare industry. But I have to admit, I have found these last few years have been eye opening in so many different ways. One of the most important things that I've learned is that healthcare must change. And I believe that nurses are in the best position to lead that change. This show is dedicated to providing a platform for nurses' voices, for putting a spotlight on the work that nurses do, and most important, imagine the future of nursing. I'd like to welcome old fans and followers, and along with the new people who are maybe just finding us right now. And I hope that you will share this with your friends and colleagues, and that we can grow even larger and make it be a comfortable place for nurses to share their feelings and thoughts and learn a whole lot more about what's going on above and beyond what you're seeing where you work. I want to invite or to welcome, I guess, my guest today is Kathleen Bartholomew, and she is amazing to me. She is an international speaker and writer, and she has probably you might most know about her with nurses hostility toward other nurses. That's kind of what many people may have heard of her about. She's traveled around the country and other countries and has become an expert on healthcare culture. And so I'm really pleased to have her here. Not only is she a smart and savvy nurse, she is also a colleague, and she's a co-creator of Nurses Transforming Healthcare.org, if you'd like to look it up. And more important to me, she's my friend, and I'm very grateful and proud to say that. So please welcome Kathleen Bartholomew with me. Kathleen, welcome.
Thank you, Leanne. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So lots happening for you. And just because there are such a wide variety of people and people from other countries, could you share a little bit more about yourself? Kind of quick background from getting into nursing to getting into speaking to people all over and becoming an expert.
I would love to be able to tell you that I chose this wonderful profession, but I didn't. A series of unfortunate events led me to a lawyer's office after a divorce, and the lawyer said, if you put your hand on this Bible and promise me that you'll be a nurse, I'll do your divorce for free. So I knew a deal when I saw one. I was 39 years old and 37 years old and had 5 children. And so when I did go to nursing school, I graduated at 39. I went to a 2-year program. I already had a 4-year degree. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I practiced as a staff nurse for about 6 years and then went into management for the next 7 years and started writing and speaking right after that. And for the last 22 years, I've been speaking about the culture of healthcare. And one of the reasons that I know the healthcare culture so well is I've been lucky enough to speak to every level of an organization. So I give board retreats for hospitals, do physician retreats, speak to nurse managers and staff, frontline nurses and auxiliary staff. And just the stories that they tell me paint a picture of the culture of healthcare.
It's a lot to hold in your head. And the amazing thing is the output that you have. And one thing I want to insert it here just for a minute, but I mentioned that only 2% of nurses right now in the United States are being published, and you are one of them. One of the things that you did a number of years ago, I'd like to show, is the Dauntless Nurse. And this is a tiny little book in lots of big font. And still, every page in here is just so important. I know that for a while, nursing schools were using this book. Can you talk about how that happened?
Sure, yes. About 6 years ago, I put an ad in the Student Nurses newsletter, the national newsletter, that said, "Tell me a story from your clinicals." And about 60 nurses wrote their stories, and 90% of them really just made me cry. After the third story, I thought, I better stop what I'm doing and focus on giving new nurses the tools they need to walk into this culture and really maintain their self-esteem and thrive. So that's what the book is about. We took every single story, nothing is made up, that the nurses submitted, both positive and negative, and we teach three training tools. I wrote it with Dr. Martha Griffith and Arna Robbins as well. And so I came to a place where I realized that if you want to change a culture, you have to focus on two things: language and behavior. And so that is absolutely critical. And I see so many good-hearted people really trying to improve their workplaces with uh, all these other processes, or the flavors of the month, you might call them. But what really is sustained change is when you give nurses the skills to have the conversations they've been avoiding. And believe me, they are.
Yes. Boy, that's one of the things I am especially proud of over these last few years, is that nurses have really stepped out of their comfort zone and they're speaking up on social media, in writing wherever they can do that, in their own circles within their own organizations, and sometimes with family and friends, etc. And I'm really proud to know how many nurses have not been pushed back into the background again, as they have in the past. So let's talk about the dauntless nurse for just a few minutes here. What does it mean to be dauntless? I love that word. Nobody uses that word.
Well, it was first used by Florence Nightingale. So in 1850, Florence Nightingale used the word because she believed her nurses needed to be dauntless. And the traditional definition means bold, intrepid, courageous, brave. But for me, it has a little bit different of a flavor to it. For me, it's courage combined with humility. So in order to have humility, you have to know that I'm not perfect, and neither is anybody else. And my view is only my view, and everybody's doing the best job that they possibly can. And in that environment, then you can really speak your truth. If I could summarize over 20 years of educating into one sentence, it would be: I never realized that power, self-esteem, and voice were all synonyms. They're all the same things. And you mentioned, Leanne, nurses stepping into their power and starting to speak up, and they are. So power and voice is the same thing as power. If I can say anything to you, if I can speak my truth to the doctor who ignored me, to the manager who I requested a day off and she hasn't gotten back to me, to the person who ignored me but hasn't said anything to me, but it really feels like I'm being ignored. If I can address all of those little situations, not only am I being dauntless, but I am protecting my patients. And that's what I think we have to understand, is that the only way to protect our patients is a true team. The only way to have a true team is if every single solitary person speaks their truth at all times. And you don't have to be perfect to do that.
Okay, so that brings up the thing that most people are talking about. Those early speakers that stood up and spoke their truth were being slammed down. It was kind of like whack-a-mole. First person with their head up got whacked down. So what does it require, like in an organization, on a department? Well, actually, tell me about the department you led when you were being a manager during that time period. You were being pushed down by the people above you and told you had to follow a specific line that they were putting in front of you. Talk about that.
But I didn't. Yes, I felt like, well, first of all, they didn't really come to the floor and round very much, so it was easy to feel like I was on my own planet. One of the things I did was create a relaxation room for the nurses, and it took administration 3 years to find that. They didn't even know it existed. So I called Tempur-Pedic and I told them I had 3 pregnant nurses and a dozen nurses over the age of 50, and they said, "What size mattress do you want?" And they shipped it to my relaxation room. So that was one thing. But another thing is there was a sentinel event, an adverse event that happened that opened my eyes. I really didn't know anything about being a nurse manager, hadn't been a staff nurse for that long. But one day when a nurse took a PCA machine and she accidentally programmed it for Dilaudid instead of morphine, I found out that the cause was the night before when she came on to the shift. She heard a group of nurses talking about her, and she heard somebody say, she'll never make a good nurse. And that's the moment that I realized that as a manager, I couldn't possibly keep the patient safe until the nurses were safe. And they needed to understand I had to draw a line in the sand saying this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. It is never okay for a nurse to tear another nurse down. But I think it's also important, Leanne, to remember that this isn't about nursing. That, everything I'm talking about is about being human, and that people haven't really role modeled how to have these critical conversations for us. In school, we don't learn how to talk to somebody who's been on Facebook for an hour and a half when we're working night shift. They just don't cover that.
Yeah, it's true. So I want to talk also about you were given protocols for staffing, and you handled it differently.
Yes, the other manager so one of my fellow managers took a piece of paper and said to her staff, "This is the new staffing grid. If there's any exceptions to it, I want you to, on the back, write your name and what the exception was and the date. And by the way, I expect the blank of this back page of this staffing grid to be empty. Do you understand?" I took the same piece of paper to my staff and said, "I know that you have the information. You know exactly the real-time acuity of the patients as charge nurses. You also know the education level of all the nurses and the skill level coming in. So staff the floor like the person you love most in the whole world is here today, but you don't know what bed they're in. And you want to make sure that the floor is safe." But one thing, in all honesty, Leanne, I did say in that conversation was, never has a nurse knocked on my door, my manager's door, and said, "Could we go down a nurse?"
Yeah.
So if you're going to go up, I said, put it on the back. Just go down sometime too. I mean, just balance it because you're the experts.
So how did that work out? Did you get flack when your budget came out at the end of the month?
No, in 7 years, my budget was only over on one quarter. And so I was really thrilled with it. But you have to teach charge nurses how to do this. You have to have permanent charge nurses to do it. And so for 3 months, I mentored them. And like one of the times, a nurse came to me and said, "We really need an extra nurse for night shift." And I said, "What's going on?" And they told me. And I said, "But what if we asked the nursing assistant to stay over for 2 hours of overtime, and he did all of the vital signs and got everybody settled? Would you still need an extra nurse?" And they said, "I don't think so." And I said, "Okay, let's do that." So you have to teach nurses alternatives and critical thinking.
And be able to have nurses that are experienced and can flow because they've had a variety of different experiences and know how to do that. I actually had a supervisor. I worked nights almost exclusively when I started working. And she would come around when I would say, "Call somebody, we need more help. We need," and I was as vague as that. And she would come and she would make me stop in the middle of the hallway, and I'm shaking and thinking, I've got 25 directions to go here. And she would make me go through, what are the biggest problem areas? What kind of nursing do you need for that help? What could help in the meantime? Kind of what you said, keeping somebody, bringing somebody in early the next day. I have somebody on another floor I can loan you for an hour or two. Would that help? And it hadn't even occurred to me. It was like all I could think of is, this is a disaster here, and we don't have enough people to cover it. So she taught me, trained me how to do that thinking.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that example that you just gave. So what happens when we have more and more tasks and we're overloaded is that our vision narrows. It gets narrower and narrower, okay? And that's why they stopped police chases, because the policemen were hitting the pedestrians and their vision was getting narrower and narrower. They just wanted to catch that car and they weren't seeing the pedestrians on the side. So we don't see our options. Probably one of the greatest threats to staffing is the fact that you, as a manager, you have to have your staff's back. They can never be helpless. For example, one time I came in and night shift said, "Oh, we were drowning, just drowning last night." And I said, "I don't ever want to hear that again. I live 10 minutes away. I sleep in scrubs. Call me." And it took them 3 weeks, and they did call me at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I did come in. But how many times do you think that they called me for the next 7 years?
Never.
No, never is right. Do you know why? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's enough just to know you can call somebody. You call the supervisor first, and if the supervisor's not available, then you call me, because we all know things crash, right? And
Exactly.
a big detriment to nursing is the charge nurse role, because we're not investing in permanent charge nurses. Many institutions let anybody be the charge nurse. When I first started, one day I came in and the charge nurses, there was 2 nurses, and they were arm wrestling, literally locked in an arm wrestling duel at the nurses station. And I said, "What are you 2 doing?" And they said, "Whoever loses has to be charge nurse." So, I mean, like, we have to elevate the role, right?
Yeah.
Give them
Yeah.
the tools and give them reason, give them more money, give them a separate job description, and have a separate skills list.
Yeah. What I keep hearing too from nurses currently is that as the experienced nurses are leaving, and new grads are coming in, they're barely even orienting them, and certainly not giving them the amount of assistance that they need to really be comfortable in the role before they're putting them into a charge role.
That absolutely right, unheard of. So we need you have to be dauntless to stand up to that, right? To a system that is
Right.
constantly asking us to do more with less every time we show up for work, while the number of tasks we do increases, the number of medications, the number of comorbidities, right? So everything is the acuity is increasing, the tasks are increasing. It's like Lucille Ball in the chocolate factory. Just we put the chocolates in
Exactly.
anywhere we can, in our hat, in the floor, and some of them are falling, right?
In your bra,
So
anywhere.
so
Yeah.
you used the word imagine. You said imagine nurses leading. So I imagine that in that scenario, nurses would have the ability to stop the conveyor belt of chocolates and say, "It's too many, it's too much. We can't do
Mhm.
that. It's not safe."
Actually, we've talked about a little bit. I may be going completely off topic here, but I am thinking about imagining what it would be like if nurses were in charge of all patient management. The key to me is that who are the ones that do patient management 24/7, 365 days a year? Who are most capable of determining how many nurses, what kind of nurses, and for the acuity of these patients? Talk about that.
The nurses, right? Every time I hear that a hospital closes, I imagine a swarm of nurses coming and taking it over so we can show how care should be done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we live in a very difficult times because the system is collapsing. And so nurses are doing the best job they can standing up for their patients. And right now that is insisting on ratios. But there is another way. And the other way is that what if nurses had the autonomy to say what they need for their patients so that they could protect their patients. And when you get to the bottom of it, when you do a root cause analysis, it comes down to the fact that in America, and only in America, is healthcare a very profitable business. And what is it profiting on? Not the health, it's profiting on disease, and it's profiting on illness. So that's why we don't have the resources we need to do our job, while CEOs make millions and hospital systems are taking over other systems. That's capitalism, that's just taking over to be larger and larger and larger. And then our voice is heard less and less.
Yeah. So nurses in history, I think, at least in the history that I've been around, and I've been around for 50 years as a nurse, um, it feels to me like always nurses wanted to pull into the background, that they wanted to put all of their effort into doing the work they were doing as they punch in, punch out, go home, and forget about whatever it was that was there. And so the need for nurses to come to the forefront and really be speaking up and showing our knowledge, our experience, just even our insights into what's going on with patients. We keep hearing about, oh, my doctor saved me. And I want to say, who was the nurse that stood by you for 8 hours watching every vital sign, watching the ups and the downs and worrying about, do I call him now? Do I call her now? You know, what are those? Those are the things that people have no idea that nurses are doing.
I know, it's funny that you say that, because one of my fondest memory is my ex-partner who wrote a book called Why Hospitals Should Fly, and was at this big signing at the convention for the Magnet conference. And one nurse comes up and puts her hands on her hips and looks at him and says, "You couldn't possibly know all this. Who's your nurse?" And I stepped in and I said, "I am." You don't know all this stuff. This is stuff that nurses know.
Yeah.
I thought that was
Yeah.
funny. But if we live in a society, and we have to take our responsibility where it's due. If you asked 100 nurses what is nursing, do you think you'd get the same answer?
No.
Right.
No,
You
we
don't.
don't, because we look at it all differently and we work in such varied roles. And so, yeah, it's different.
So
Have
that's
you,
why
have
the
you done?
general, and that's why the general public doesn't know what we do either. So,
Mhm.
I mean, because of Grey's Anatomy, because of TV shows, when you've got the wrong ratio, you've got the doctor doing everything that a nurse really does. So, the public doesn't understand is that we save lives.
Yes.
We that our vigilance, we're the ones that are reporting that your urine output has decreased, that a doctor can't exist without a nurse, and vice versa. We are in a
Yes.
symbiotic relationship where we need each other to deliver care. And when you put both of those skill sets together, you can heal the patient. And I think
Yes.
that the greatest threat to our vigilance is the electronic health record, which wastes so much time and is not of value. And is, you know,
Mhm.
I thought my patients were much safer without it, frankly.
Yeah, I've just been listening to doctors talking about this, and it's very interesting, to see it from their point of view too. But we know that it was never designed for healthcare at all. It was really designed to be able to get charges. So
Well,
that's kind of
that's the
how
whole
it's set up.
system. Yeah, yeah, you're talking about the system again. Charges, charges, charges. What, if there was a payment for somebody to be healthy, how would that rewire the system?
Mhm.
If we paid the same amount for amputating a diabetic's foot as we did for educating the diabetic, how would that change the system? If we had a
Or
billing
even
code for
more, more
yeah,
for education.
right, or a billing code for
Yeah.
wellness prevention,
Mhm.
so there's a
Well,
lot of
a billing
changes.
code period for nurses. And a lot of people have been talking about that. And I think, it sounds like a good idea, but so many people have said, we need to get out of that budget line of room and board. I mean, what is diminishing more to nurses than to be said, you have no value to the organization other than, carrying out cleaning and, you know, you're in the room and board. That's the value that we see of you.
But that scenario is in the current business model. So what if there wasn't a business model? What if healthcare
Yeah.
was a service? Like, one idea of a service would, as you and I know and have talked about, is healthcare. Dr. John Silver's idea of healthcare as a public utility model that's just as vital to every person as water and electricity. I mean, if you're fighting for broadband internet for everybody to have internet, why not health? Why aren't you
Yes.
fighting for everybody to healthy? But we don't understand. Like, remember when firemen, it was a long time ago, some houses had fire insurance and others didn't, until a house burnt down and the person who had fire insurance was right next to them and said, "Oh, wait a minute, my house is going to go down too because you don't have insurance." The same thing is true with healthcare. So we're only going to be as well as the people in our community are well. And as a nation, we get an F. I mean, a big fat F. We're going the wrong way. We're the only industrialized country to go down. We're not even addressing the current and vital things that are demeaning and depressing our children, which digital media addiction, for example.
Yeah. We're kind of focusing on the negatives, and we both know that there's some wonderful positives coming forward. And so maybe we can spend just a few minutes with the ideas. You and I have been on a committee, or kind of started out as a committee, I guess, 2 years ago, and we've been meeting every Saturday for the most part for 2+ years. And what we have found is that every day there's more people that are coming along and saying, this makes sense to me. And what we're talking about is nurse-led clinics and eventually nurse-led hospitals. not exclusively run by nurses. What we want is that all of the people coming into an organization to create healthcare have a background in health. They understand what it takes. And the largest thing that even doctors, I think, don't always get is the effect that care has on the healing of a patient, and the care has on the nurse herself and himself.
Absolutely. Yes. So this is about elevating the value of caring to humanity.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about is, what's more important, to, be able to program a PCA, or to not die alone because the nurse will stay with you and you have no family members, or
Kind of lost track of our time here a little bit, but I think we're getting close. What I'd like to do, you had said something about that nurses can reclaim our power, that we have power that we've never, most of us probably have never really utilized. And those of us who have used it and have seen a result, it is, you talk about empowering, it is. So what are the first steps? What do you do if you're a nurse that has never really stood up for yourself? You've stood up for your patients, your patient families, but maybe you've never really stood up for yourself. Where do you
I
start?
think that's a great question, Leanne. So I think the place to start is to identify the conversation that needs to happen, and probably that's the one you're avoiding. That's the one that you're not having because you've decided it's not worth it. So when you talk about power and reclaiming ourselves, our own power, our profession's power, you're talking about reclaiming your voice. Because what our system needs is every single nurse to speak their truth and to say what they see. So if you could just say what you see, you don't have to fix it. Just say what you see. You're not responsible for fixing it. You are responsible for saying what you see and speaking your truth. So the first step is to identify it. The second step would be to practice how to respond to it. Learn some skills. Take the dauntless nurse and take one of those three. Take one of the three skills that we teach here and practice it before you, and then have the courage, the dauntless courage, to have that conversation for yourself, your profession, your patients. I mean, when you speak up, you're going to feel so much better. And
Yeah.
to be heard, there's nothing more wonderful than being heard, to be listened to your voice to be valued and respected. And every single person wants that.
Here's one of the, you talked about behavior and communication were the two things that were most important. And right now, people are so frustrated. They feel like they've been abused. They're angry. They're maybe, mental health is not good. They've had problems in families and etc. because of what's happened to them in these last few years, particularly. If you are not in an organization that is supportive of nurses, if you're not on a department where you're supported as a nurse and somebody like you were standing behind your nurses, what do you do? I mean, how do you not just show up and punch the time card and get out of there as fast as possible? What else can you do?
That's a great question. So we're always taught to professionally use the chain of command. If I have an issue and it's not resolved and I bring it to my manager, and I always give 3 strikes, you're out as my rule, and the manager doesn't listen, I bring it to the director. The director doesn't listen, I bring it to the chief nursing officer. So escalate. And the chief nursing officer is not if you're not heard at that level, then you can go to the board. But, we're always supposed to follow the chain of command. And that I think is important. The other thing is on a daily, you have to look after yourself. What it comes down to is, if you're being asked to do the impossible, then you must do what many new nurses are doing, and that is leave to save yourself. We can't all stay and be martyrs and hurt ourselves for a system that is broken and based. This whole system is based on yachts for many wealthy people. Okay. So when you look at it that way, I mean, we want to protect our patients, but please know this is not the way it's going to be forever. I really believe that nurses are going to be able to show that the caring and the skills that together that we can provide to the general public are so valuable, and that if we open up a space which what will happen when everything collapses, for us to do that, then really you're going to love working in this profession.
I think that is the thing I feel so sad about, is that the new nurses coming in aren't getting a chance to really have those experiences that go above and beyond just, passing meds, dealing with IVs that aren't running. Many of us have seen those pictures on social media where they show this bank of machinery all around a patient. You can't even see the patient. All there is all these different monitors and all these different machines and all this medication that's being given, and the nurse is managing all of that. But at the same time, a good nurse has their hand and their heart on that patient too, and the patient feels it. And that often makes more difference than any of the rest of it. So we need to get that coming forward. And that's one of the things that I want to do on this show. And I'm going to put that out to the people that are listening right now. If you know of people who are taking positive steps and making some ground swell, moving forward to have nurses be heard, we have to do it in a way that is professional, that is, using words and behavior that can stand up to, we're asking to be considered a profession, but if we're not acting like a professional, it makes it really, really different for anybody else to hear us. All we are doing is confirming their already bad opinion of us.
Mm-hmm. It's
so,
true.
Yeah. So
And
we've kind of covered, go ahead.
I just wanted to, you were talking about caring and that person with all the machines. And a line from a book came to mind. A lady had 16 surgeries because her face was smashed in an accident. And she said, "He sat on my bed and touched a place no scalpel could ever reach." And I thought, wow, like finally, and all the people that cared for her, there was this one person who could see through all the machines and everything, because it's about that heart connection. It's about compassion. That's where healing happens. Nurses heal. Nurses heal.
Yes. And that's not just a myth. That's not just something that nurses say. It's actually been, Gene Watkins has been proving this and researching it for 40 or 50 years. And there are books written everywhere about what it means. And the books that have been written that say the more time nurses have to spend with patients, the more likely that patient will heal, will be confident going home, and will seek out attention or help if they need it.
I know. I call her Saint Jean Watson.
Yeah, I would love to meet her. I haven't met her yet, but so we need to bring this to a close. And as much as I hate to do that, I just want to thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Again, I hope that our listeners right now will contact me at Once a Nurse, Always a Nurse. I guess it's onceanurse.com now. Is my website. There are previous podcasts that are on there that you can listen to. Also, please email me at leanne@onceanurse.com. Love to talk to you. Can anybody email you, Kathleen? Are you okay with that?
Oh, sure. My website's KathleenBartholomew.com. All my blogs linked to the My American Nurse are there, as well as several articles and resources and 3 free videos to use for training for managers. My email.
And if they want you to come to their organization, are you up for it?
It's my favorite thing, meeting face to face. Yes.
You do it so well. So we will close out this particular session of Once a Nurse, Always a Nurse. Please come back and join us again. We will be readily available on all of the usual places you can find podcasts. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Leanne.